Hi and welcome to Exploring with Em and Stu.
And today we are here in the lovely little village of Antingham in Norfolk, which is just north of Norfolk, where we've got two rather interesting churches that we want to show you and tell you a little bit about. The churchyard here in Antingham may appear quite unusual because we have in fact got two separate churches built in the same churchyard. But in fact for Norfolk that's actually not that unusual because there are in fact at least 12 other villages in Norfolk that actually have at least two churches in the same churchyard. And the one here at Antingham, of course, is one of those. The village of Antingham actually dates back well before the Domesday Book was constructed, and the nearby river Ant actually takes its name from the village. And during those times, the village actually had two lords of manors and each had its own church, which again was actually quite a common thing here in Norfolk. So faced with the prospect of there actually ending up being no usable church at all here in Antingham, as I said, they actually decided that they were going to restore St Mary's, and as you can see today it is looking beautiful. But that was of course at the sacrifice of St Margaret's, which of course this village, they didn't have any money or anything that they could actually spend on restoring the other church, so they decided to use a lot of the building materials here, and I believe they even sold the bells in the belfry to actually pay for some of the restoration. And that in a nutshell really is why you see this one in ruins and the other one not. And so here we have it. Sadly, we're having to have a look at it from behind a fence, but I do believe up until just a few years ago, the whole of this structure was just completely covered in ivy and completely obscured from view really at all. But I can point out a few little features. So of course, we've got the chancel just behind us here, and considering the size of the nave, this actually appears to be quite a large chancel really. And you can see that we can only really make out one window there, so that looks quite likely the case. And just coming along here, you can see it was built mainly of, well, flint stones really. There's not much knapping going on there because of course the decorated styles of architecture that they used in the 13th and the 14th century weren't really being used here. I mean, this was built sort of long before that time. And just over here, looks like we had a little bit of a north entrance just there with a piece of fallen masonry sort of sadly blocking that. But considering really the state of a lot of this church, if we sort of look up to the belfry, it's actually not in the worst state really. If you look up to the top, you can see some fairly ornate windows. Just below that there, we can see evidence of those put-log holes which were used during construction. We often see them at these churches. But you can't help really but to not point out this rather enormous crack that runs pretty much through the entire belfry. And it has been suggested that there may be a possibility that this could have been struck by lightning at some time, very likely over the last few centuries after it went out of use. But as I just sort of come round the back of this, we've got a rather large window opening that we've just got there, and again, that looks like it was fairly basic, not too much ornate sort of features going on there. But it's difficult really for me to take you much further around this side because it's sort of fully overgrown now and full of nettles. But I think we will get down there and have a look actually inside the church the best that we can. And just coming around to the west side of the church, I'm just literally right in front of the chancel here, and this is actually quite a lovely sort of vantage point because you can really make out that rather ornate belfry that we've got there. Like I said, this wasn't built in the decorated sort of architectural style, so there wasn't many sort of overly ornate features, but it's actually quite nice to sort of see that just down there, and I'll hopefully be able to take a little bit of footage and maybe some pictures of that. But I will bring you just a little bit more around here because this side appears to be where they used an awful lot more of those stones in the construction of restoring obviously the other church, and there's a huge chunk of this chancel literally completely gone. But like I said, sadly we can't show you an awful lot of this, but it's got quite an interesting story and bit of history, so it's nice to take a little look since we were passing by.
And that was, as usual, a bit of an introduction from Emma there.
Yep.
I've got a few questions about, because obviously we're looking at two churches today, haven't we? Is this a Reformation victim.
Is it? Well, technically, yes.
Oh.
Yes, because Antingham was under the lordship of St Benet's Abbey, and which we know, if you've watched our previous videos, of course, St Benet's was destroyed during the Reformation.
It was, yeah.
And so there was no funding given anymore, of course, for the upkeep of the churches in Antingham.
Right, okay.
And so a village of this size, which is really, really quite small, isn't it? As you can see, they just couldn't afford the upkeep of 2 churches. And so by the 18th century, they were actually both in quite bad disrepair. And in fact, they're described as being semi-ruinous. And of course, as you see today, only one of them is ruined. And that is basically because this church was sacrificed
to restore
the other church. So this is obviously St Margaret's.
Okay.
And they used a lot of the building materials and that, which I'll tell you a bit about in a minute.
We will say we are going to go into the other one. What's this one called again?
That's St Mary's.
St Mary's. It is open for private worship today. There is no one in there. I've already been in to have a quick look.
Yeah.
But I've taken some footage in there, but we will take you around it because it is a lovely church
and
inside.
Hopefully we can point out a few features.
That's it.
Not been in there yet. Maybe there's some interesting things to see. So
okay, we'll see you in a bit.
And so here we are in the wonderfully restored St Mary's, which was restored in the 18th century, like we said, using a lot of the materials from St Margaret's. And just passing by this rather lovely font, which supposedly dates from around about the 1200s, which I guess would predate this church, so maybe it originally came from the other church. But there's not an awful lot of ornate features to show you in here, but I'm going to point out a few of the features. And I think to start with, we're going to head straight to the chancel, because there's a few bits and pieces that I can point out to you here, which usually I show you in ruin, but thankfully in here, of course, they're not. So we've got some rather lovely stained glass windows, and there's actually 3 in this chancel. And if we just look up here, we've actually got, I think that's St Magdalene, we've got St Mary, and I think we've got St Martha. And Martha's sort of holding some old pots and pans there, which is quite interesting. But I think these were actually sort of designed by William Morris, so I read. So I think they're sort of relatively sort of special in that respect. But if we just bring you down here, we've actually got a piscina, and there's actually 2 here. But I'm going to show you this one because it's a little bit easier to get to. So if you just take a little look down there, we've actually got a rather lovely piscina, and of course this is where they would have washed their hands or vessels and things like that. So again, we're used to seeing these in ruins. It's quite nice to see one intact there. But if we take you back down to the nave, we've got another feature that we were quite excited to take you for a look at, because if you've watched our previous church videos, then you would have known we spoke about rood lofts and rood screens. And just here, we've actually got the stairs that would have led up to the rood loft, or possibly the beam, where of course they would have put sort of statues and things like that, because this church would have originally been Catholic. Now it's blocked off, as you can see up there. Again, these were blocked off and disused after the Reformation, because those sort of things just weren't used, you know, once the abolishing of the churches and that. But it's still quite nice to see that that's actually intact. But other than that, you know, the usual features that you see in these lovely churches, including sort of some of these lovely pews. They're not overly ornate, but I can imagine they've got some sort of age to them. And we'll bring you down to the west side, where we've got an entrance just here, but that's locked off, and that goes straight outside, so there's no porch or anything there. And of course, we've got the bell tower. And I do believe that when they did a little bit more restoration on this church some years later, I think they actually had to sort of sell some of the bells from this church as well to sort of pay for that, because like I said, there was just no money, unfortunately, in such a small church, but or small village anyway. But it's quite lovely, and I think they actually have a service here, possibly just once a month, but it is open daily for anybody that wants to come and take a look, or sort of private prayers or anything. So yeah, it's nice to finally be able to get inside one of these actual churches that isn't a ruin. But anyway, I think we're going to get back outside and tell you a little bit more before we say goodbye.
So we've come out of the church now, and me and Emma decided to have a little walk around the grounds, and it's actually really nice grounds, even though it's uneven.
It's very well kept.
It's very well kept. It's a really lovely place to visit, this is. But they've got really nice, got nice benches and stuff like that. They do look after the place really nicely, and it's such a beautiful day today. But have we got any more information that we can say about this church, Emma?
Not an awful lot. We wanted to make this a relatively short video, really, because we were just passing by on the way back from another explore. But I think this parish was taken over by the parish of Ludden, I think, which was often the case. I think that was consolidated into the parish of North Walsham.
Yeah.
We're only just a couple of miles or so, really, aren't we, from North Walsham? So often the case. But it's nice to see that, like so many of these sort of medieval Norfolk churches, that despite it really not being used very much these days, they still look after them, don't they?
They do.
And that's why we often come across these tiny little villages in the middle of nowhere. This isn't so much in the middle of nowhere.
No.
Which have these churches. And there's, as I think I've said previously, there's about 1,000 medieval churches built in Norfolk alone. And I think there's about 650 of them that still remain, with about 150 or so, which I think are ruined.
Yeah.
And of course, this one here, St Margaret's, is one of those. And that's why we thought we'd take you for a little look at that. And of course, we couldn't not take a look at the rather splendid St Mary's while we were here.
And it is quite nice that they're protecting their windows, as you can probably see there. It has shuttering on them.
Yeah.
So they are protecting their stained glass because they are very, very old.
Oh, absolutely. I'm not too sure the exact date, but like I said, inside, they're sort of quite special, these windows, I think. And to have three rather sort of ornate stained glass windows in a church like this, and we don't see it very often,
no, we don't.
So it's quite lovely. So.
That's it. But we're going to get round to the front now, and we'll see you when we get round there. And here we are, we've arrived at the porch.
Yeah, well, the porch was actually rebuilt, I think, in 1882 because it was blown over during a storm.
Ah.
So there you go, as it continued, of course, the church to be restored over many, many years for many reasons. So, and you couldn't even tell, actually, looking at it today, that it isn't of the same sort of
that's right,
age of restoration. So,
absolutely.
Yes.
But we have come to the end of our video now, and if you have liked it, please like and subscribe. Drop us a comment. You might even have a little bit of experience of being here. Yeah. We want to hear from you.
A little bit more information about it, because this is fairly basic, this video. But I mean, this makes up another 2, in fact, of our Every Church Challenge.
It does.
Where we're trying to visit as many churches as we can in the East Anglian area. Like I said, there's more than 1,000 was more than 1,000 in Norfolk alone, so we're going to try our best. But if you're interested in seeing some more of these churches, then check out our playlist, and there'll be a link in the description below for you to do that.
That's it.
But of course, as well, we've got our lovely Patreons who help to support us with the channel every month, so we can continue to come to places like this and buy all the equipment that we need to do that, which is fantastic. So if you'd like to also join them, again, there'll be a link in the description.
That's it.
Here from the lovely little village of Antingham in Norfolk. As always, thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.
Bye-bye.
Bye for now.